What if everything you think you know about how decisions work is wrong? Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally, structurally, architecturally wrong. What if the way most players think about poker, about choices, about outcomes, about the relationship between what you decide and what happens, is built on a model of reality that physics itself abandoned over 100 years ago? Classical physics told us the universe was like a giant clock. Predictable, deterministic. If you knew the position and velocity of every particle, you could calculate the future with perfect precision. Chess is a game built on that model. Every move has a correct answer. The board is fully visible. The rules are perfectly deterministic. Given enough calculation, truth is always reachable. Then quantum mechanics arrived, and it shattered that model completely. At the deepest level of reality, things do not have fixed states until they are observed. Particles exist in superpositions of multiple possibilities simultaneously. The act of measurement itself changes what is being measured. And uncertainty is not a limitation of our knowledge. It is the fundamental structure of reality itself. Here is what nobody in poker has told you clearly. Poker is not a chess game. Poker is a quantum game. The hand your opponent holds does not have a fixed identity until the cards are revealed. It exists, from your perspective, as a probability wave across all possible hands, weighted by everything you know, updating with every new piece of information, collapsing into a specific reality only at showdown. The player who thinks in fixed hands is playing classical physics at a quantum table, and classical physics at a quantum table loses. Most players sit down at a poker table and immediately commit what quantum physicists would call a category error. They treat an uncertain system as if it were a certain one. They look at their cards. They look at the board. They form a belief about what their opponent has, a specific hand, a specific intention, and they make a decision based on that fixed belief. The belief feels like analysis. It feels rational. It is neither. It is the cognitive equivalent of Newtonian mechanics applied to a world that runs on quantum rules. Here is what this costs you. Every time you put someone on a specific hand rather than a range of hands, you are collapsing a probability wave prematurely. You are forcing certainty onto a system that is structurally uncertain. And when reality refuses to match your collapsed certainty, when the river reveals something you did not account for, you call it bad luck. It was not bad luck. It was a classical model failing in a quantum system. But here is where it gets interesting. The quantum player does not put opponents on hands. They put opponents on states. The opponent's hand exists as a superposition of all hands consistent with their actions, weighted by position, by stack depth, by timing, by the specific history between you. Every action is an observation. Every observation slightly collapses the probability wave. The state becomes more defined, never fully determined, until the cards are shown. And the quantum player makes decisions not about what is, but about what the probabilities suggest, across the full distribution of possibilities, across all possible futures simultaneously. This is range thinking. And range thinking is not a poker strategy. It is the correct epistemological framework for making decisions in any system governed by uncertainty. The poker table is just the place where that framework is tested under financial pressure and real-time constraints. What you are about to understand will not just change how you play poker, it will change how you think. There is an experiment in quantum physics called the double slit experiment. You fire particles at a barrier with two slits. If you do not observe which slit a particle passes through, it creates an interference pattern on the other side, behaving as if it passed through both slits simultaneously, as if it were a wave of all possible paths. But the moment you place a detector to observe which slit it uses, the interference pattern disappears. The particle stops behaving like a wave of possibilities. It collapses into a single definite path. The act of observation changes the result. At the poker table, observation works in exactly the same direction. Imagine you hold ace-king. The flop comes jack-7-2, rainbow. Your opponent, a solid, thinking player, leads into you with a half-pot bet. The classical thinker says, he has a jack. I am behind. I fold. The wave has been collapsed. Decision made. The quantum thinker sees something different. They do not observe a specific hand. They observe a state, a distribution. This player's leading range on a board like this includes top pair, yes, but also underpairs protecting equity, draws that do not exist here, but do exist in their mental model, and a meaningful percentage of bluffs trying to take away the range advantage they believe you have as the preflop raiser. The quantum thinker is not deciding whether their ace-king beats a jack. They are deciding whether raising here is profitable across the full distribution of hands this player could be leading with. That is a completely different decision, and it produces a completely different result. Now pay attention, because the deeper implication here is where everything changes. If observation affects what you are playing against, if the act of deciding how to see a situation changes the situation you are responding to, then the primary skill is not making good decisions. The primary skill is maintaining the right observational framework, seeing probability where others see certainty, seeing distributions where others see hands, seeing waves where others see particles. The player who sees waves wins, every time. Before we go deeper, I need to stop here, because something important is happening in your mind right now, and I do not want you to move past it too quickly. You are starting to realize that the way you have been thinking about decisions, not just at the table, but everywhere, may have been built on a framework that is older and less accurate than it needed to be. The certainty you have been seeking, the specific read you have been looking for, the desire to know exactly what your opponent has, rather than to understand the distribution of what they might have. That desire for classical certainty in a quantum system has been costing you, not just in poker, in every domain where decisions matter. If that realization is landing, if there is a gap between how you have been thinking and how you now understand you could be thinking, I built something exactly for that gap. The Mind of a Grinder. Complete System is 10 structured books that build this thinking from the foundation up. Not tips, not isolated ideas. A complete thinking architecture, the probability framework, the emotional discipline, the strategic flexibility, the decision-making structure, built in sequence, designed to compound session after session. The whole system for $29.90, this week only, at the launch price. After this window closes, the individual books each carry that same price separately. The link is in the pinned comment. The window is open right now. Now, let us go to the layer that changes how you think about every decision you have ever made. Richard Feynman, one of the architects of quantum mechanics, described what he called the sum over histories. The idea is this: a particle does not take a single path from point A to point B. It takes every possible path simultaneously, weighted by the probability of each. The paths that reinforce each other produce the observable trajectory. The paths that cancel each other disappear. The result we observe is not the result of a single definite path. It is the result of all possible paths, computed simultaneously, arriving at a probability-weighted outcome. At the poker table, every hand you play is a sum over histories. When you run a bluff and get called, you did not make a bad decision. If the bluff was correct against the full distribution of your opponent's range, you experienced one realization of a probabilistic system. The path that was drawn was not the only path that existed. The other paths, the ones where they fold, were equally real as probabilities. They were simply not the ones selected this time. Here is a concrete example. You are on the river with a busted flush draw. The board is dry. Your opponent has checked twice. The pot is 200. You bet 120. They call and show top pair. Did you make a bad decision? Only if you answer the wrong question. The wrong question is, did this bluff work? The right question is, was this bluff profitable against the full range of hands my opponent checks twice on this board? If their checking range contains enough weak hands, second pair, missed draws, overcards, then your bluff was correct. You experienced one unfavorable realization. The decision, run across all possible histories, was sound. This is the foundation of EV thinking. Expected value is not about what happens in a specific instance. It is the probability-weighted average of all possible outcomes across the full distribution of scenarios. And the player who genuinely internalizes this, who can make a call that loses and feel not regret but calm certainty that the decision was correct across all possible histories, has achieved something remarkable. They have decoupled their evaluation of decisions from the noise of individual outcomes. And when the bad beat hits, when the two-outer arrives on the river, they do not experience injustice. They experience one path being drawn from a space of paths. The other paths still existed. The decision was still correct. The sum over histories still favors the process. Here is where classical thinking and quantum thinking produce their most dramatic divergence. And it is not in strategy, it is in emotional response. The classical thinker believes that good decisions produce good outcomes. This is the Newtonian model. If I execute correctly, the result will follow. When the result does not follow, when the correct decision loses, the classical thinker experiences a fundamental violation of their model. Not just a frustrating variance event, a challenge to the entire structure of how they understand the relationship between skill and outcome. And this challenge, experienced under financial pressure, produces tilt. Tilt is not an emotional weakness. It is an epistemological failure. It is what happens when a classical model meets a quantum system and cannot survive the collision. The quantum thinker has a different model from the start. They understand that the relationship between good decisions and good outcomes is probabilistic, not deterministic. A good decision produces a higher probability of good outcomes across the full distribution of similar situations, not a guaranteed outcome in this one. The bad beat does not violate the model. It is entirely consistent with it. This is why emotional control in poker is not primarily a psychological skill. It is an epistemological one. Fix the model and the emotional response changes automatically, not because the losses hurt less, because they no longer violate the fundamental understanding of how the system works. Variance is not an injustice. It is the natural behavior of a quantum system, the expected distribution of outcomes around a probability-weighted mean. And when you fully internalize that, bad beats become what they actually are: data points. Neither evidence of bad play nor punishment for good play, simply the system behaving exactly as quantum systems behave. That reframing does not bring the chips back, but it makes the next decision cleaner, faster, and completely uncontaminated by the emotional residue of a model that was wrong from the beginning. And this is what most players miss entirely. And let us talk about superposition and about how it maps onto one of the most misunderstood concepts in poker strategy. In quantum mechanics, a particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured. It is not in one state or another. It is in all states at once. The particle does not have a secret definite state that we cannot see. It literally exists in multiple states simultaneously. This is not metaphor. It is the measured reality of how the universe behaves. At the poker table, your range exists in superposition. When you raise from the button, from your opponent's perspective, you are in superposition across every hand in your opening range. The premium pairs, the strong broadways, the suited connectors, the speculative hands you mix in for balance. If your range is in genuine superposition, if you play your strongest and your weakest hands with the same frequencies and the same sizing in the same situations, your opponents cannot collapse the wave. They cannot observe which specific state you are in, because your action is consistent with all states simultaneously. They are left playing against the full distribution, against the superposition itself. This is what game-theoretically optimal play means at its deepest level. Not a specific strategy for specific hands. The construction and maintenance of a range that exists in genuine superposition across all board textures and all actions. A range that cannot be profitably collapsed by any observation your opponents make. The GTO player is the quantum player, not trying to have the best hand, trying to maintain the most coherent superposition. Now here is the contrast. Exploitative play is the classical strategy. You identify a specific state your opponent is in, a specific weakness, a specific tendency, and act in the single deterministic way that maximizes value against that state. This works brilliantly when the read is correct and when the opponent is operating classically. It breaks when the read is wrong or when the opponent adapts. The quantum player reads the environment. Against classical opponents, they collapse. Against quantum opponents, they maintain superposition. The choice of framework is itself a strategic decision. Uncertainty is not the enemy. Uncertainty is the field in which skill operates. That sentence is worth sitting with, because most of the resistance to variance, most of the inability to play well under pressure, Most of the failure to develop past a certain level comes from one failure, not making that reframe. The classical thinker treats uncertainty as an obstacle, something to be reduced, predicted, eliminated. The more uncertain the situation, the more uncomfortable they feel. The more uncomfortable they feel, the worse their decisions become. The worse their decisions become, the more desperately they need certainty. It is a feedback loop, and it produces exactly the fragility that high-variance environments exploit most completely. The quantum thinker treats uncertainty as the environment in which their advantage lives. And here is why that is not just philosophy. Here is the structural reality underneath it. In a world of perfect information and perfect classical play, poker reduces to solved symmetry. Everyone plays the same way because the correct answer is objectively determinable. There is no edge, no skill premium, no meaningful difference between players. The game becomes worthless as a competition. Uncertainty is what creates the gap. Uncertainty is what allows skill to compound over time. Without uncertainty, there is no game worth playing. The skilled player's edge is not in having better information. It is in processing uncertain information more accurately, not in knowing what will happen, in modeling what might happen across all possible futures, weighting those futures correctly, and making decisions optimal across the full probability space. This is a skill that does not plateau the way technical knowledge does. Because the practice of thinking well under uncertainty is the practice of updating a model, and models that are actively updated improve without limit. The player who learns to love uncertainty does not just play better poker. They have found the terrain in which mastery actually lives. There is a concept in quantum physics called entanglement. When two particles interact, they can become entangled, connected in a way that the state of one instantly influences the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. Measure one particle and the other's state is instantly determined, even if they are on opposite sides of the universe. The information does not travel. The connection is fundamental. At the poker table, your actions across the session are entangled. A 3-bet you made in orbit 1 is entangled with the hand you play in orbit 9. The fold you showed in orbit 3 changes the probability distribution your opponent assigns to your range in orbit 12. The bluff you fired and showed in the first hour of the session ripples through every decision at this table for the rest of the night. Your session is not a sequence of independent events. It is an entangled system in which every action modifies the state of every future interaction. This is why session-level thinking is different from hand-level thinking. The player who thinks only at the hand level treats each pot as a separate, independent particle. They optimize for the single hand. But the quantum player thinks in entangled systems. The value of any action is not simply its EV in this pot. It is its EV in this pot, plus the information it creates about your range, plus the effect of that information on all future pots. An action that loses chips in this pot but creates a state of entanglement that wins substantially more across the next 15 pots may be the highest EV play in the entire session. This is image management at its deepest level, not as a psychological trick, as the management of an entangled information system across time. When you fire a bluff and get called and show it, you are not just losing a pot. You are creating an entangled state that will influence every future interaction with every player at that table. The information radiates. The quantum player accounts for those ripples rather than treating each pot as if it occurred in isolation. The session is the particle. The hands are the probability waves that compose it. We have traveled far from the conventional poker lesson, and I want to pause here, because the implications of everything we have discussed extend beyond poker in a way that is worth stating directly. The quantum thinking framework, holding probability distributions rather than fixed beliefs, updating fluidly rather than defending positions, evaluating decisions across the full space of possible outcomes, finding equanimity in uncertainty because uncertainty is where skill operates. This is not a poker strategy. It is a general cognitive architecture for navigating any domain characterized by incomplete information. Every significant decision in life occurs in exactly that domain. Career decisions, relationship decisions, business decisions, investment decisions. The decisions that most shape a life are precisely the ones made under conditions of genuine uncertainty, where the correct answer is not determinable in advance, where the feedback arrives late and incompletely. where the outcome does not reliably validate the quality of the process that produced it. The person who has developed a quantum cognitive framework navigates those domains better. Not because they have specific knowledge, because they have a better architecture for thinking under conditions where knowledge is structurally incomplete. Poker is the training ground. The financial stakes make the feedback real. The time pressure makes the execution demanding. The variance makes the emotional discipline non-negotiable. But the skill that develops, if the development is done consciously, is not a poker skill. It is a thinking skill, a way of existing in uncertainty that produces better outcomes across every domain where uncertainty governs, which is every domain that matters. Here is what I want you to carry out of this video. Not a technique, not a strategy adjustment, a fundamental reorientation in how you understand what you are doing when you make a decision. You are not trying to find the right answer. There is no single right answer in a quantum system. You are trying to find the best action across the full probability distribution of possible states your opponent might be in. The full distribution of possible futures each action produces. The full distribution of outcomes each action generates across infinite repetitions of this situation. The best action is the one that produces the highest weighted average of value across all of those distributions simultaneously. When you make that decision, and when the outcome does not match what you hoped, you do not revise the decision. You revise the model if there is genuine evidence that the model was wrong, and you distinguish clearly between a model being wrong and a model being right, but producing an unfavorable realization. These are completely different things. The quantum thinker makes this distinction automatically, without emotional contamination, without the irrational revision that comes from confusing a single realization with the underlying distribution. Poker did not invent this thinking. Quantum mechanics discovered it. But poker, played with full awareness of what it is actually teaching, is one of the most efficient training environments for developing it that has ever existed. Every session is a laboratory. Every hand is an experiment. Every outcome is a data point in a model that is being actively refined. And the scientist who runs those experiments, who updates the model, refines the probabilities, improves the framework session by session, year by year, is not becoming a better poker player in the narrow sense. They are becoming a better thinker in every sense that matters. Poker is not a game of certainty. It is a game of probabilities that behave like reality itself. And those who understand that, who have made the shift from classical to quantum thinking, do not just win more hands. They inhabit a different relationship with uncertainty itself, not as a threat to be managed, as the terrain in which mastery lives. The wave does not collapse. The wave is the game. Leave a comment that reflects something this video changed in how you see a decision, at the table, or anywhere else. Not a reaction. A genuine reflection on a specific decision that looks different now. I read every one. This conversation is real and it continues. Like this video if the thinking landed. Subscribe to Mind of a Grinder if you want to keep going at this depth. The pinned comment has the complete thinking system. The architecture behind everything in this video, structured into 10 books, at the launch price that closes this week. The universe is probabilistic. Your thinking can be too. Play quantum poker.